As a founder, you're facing constant pressure to perform. Whether it's to your employees or your investors, you have a lot to prove. Now imagine you're hired as the CEO for a startup that's had not one, not two, but 5 separate CEOs. This week, we're talking with someone who has filled those very shoes and has taken a struggling startup to one that's been acquired by a major enterprise. Join us in today's conversation with John Munro, CEO of Chargeback, and investor Gavin Christensen, as we bring you both sides of A Perfect Pitch. Perfect Pitch is a podcast from Kickstart that reveals the minds of both investors and entrepreneurs throughout a startup's journey. I'm your host, Karen Zelnick, and I'm excited to introduce you to today's guests. John, I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about you. After growing and preparing Utah-based Orange Legal for a successful sale, you were then the co-founder and COO of HeyZook, a software development company, and then vice president of national markets for Blackstone Discovery and the CEO and founder for Impact Discovery. So clearly, when you joined Chargeback as COO in 2018 and then transitioned to CEO in 2019, you had a lot of experience under your belt. And we're going to talk more about that. We're really going to dive into that story. But before I move on, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Probably just that I recognize that I'm on this podcast today because the likes of Davis Smith or Rob Nelson or other celebrities couldn't fit it into their schedule. But in all seriousness, obviously, I'm super stoked to be here. Excited to talk to folks.
As I said, we're very excited to have you. I cannot overuse that word enough for this episode. And Gavin, of course, it's always great to have you back on the show. We're going to have a link to your bio in our show notes. But can you tell us something that you're seeing in the VC ecosystem that you're interested in?
It's just a really unique time in the world, in the VC market, as public markets have taken just a real haircut in the tech space. And we're seeing that trickle down, starting with the biggest companies and trickling down to the smallest over the next several months. There's still a lot of money out there. It's still an incredible time to start a company. As I've told my team, it's sort of back to being a venture capitalist. And there have been times over the last few years where it felt like it was maybe easier to raise funding or easier for things to go well. It's back to being lots of risk out there and challenging to navigate. So that's what we're seeing. So Kez, welcome back.
Thank you.
And I'd love to hear, I'm sure our audience would love to hear something about you that they don't know.
I had a little boy, so back from maternity leave and so excited to be here. And something else they might not know about me, I'm scuba certified.
Ooh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. There's just always layers to the onion, I guess. So, yeah. But let's dive into the discussion. It's going to be a good one. John, we're going to start with you. As I mentioned, you were the COO of Chargeback for about 6 months before transitioning to CEO. What can you tell me about that transition?
I think I realized that people probably need perspective on where Chargeback was at that time. Runway was extremely short. Our cap table was semi-questionable, but being cleaned up. We had significantly expanded our leadership team. We had this incredible demand from these key customers, but it significantly outweighed our ability to actually deliver on those promises. Then, of course, the driver of change was, of course, a transition in the CEO role. I had been in the COO seat for about 60 days when the CEO departed. And I operated for another 3 months or 4 months or so as the de facto CEO. I don't think Gavin and the rest of the board were quite certain yet if I was the guy. We were fixing a lot of the challenges that we had internally while we're really navigating some pretty challenging employee scenarios. Folks that were really excited about where we were going. And then you'd jump into the next conversation. People were freaking out, ready to run out the door, realizing that everything was on fire. So just a really crazy time. I think for me, the biggest thing that I learned in that process was rip off the Band-Aid. Everything was going well. I had really wonderful relationships and communication with the organization. The employees were starting to feel great. There were some of those things that you kind of see in turnarounds where you start seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And you're like, oh, we're going the right direction. Let's go. So I didn't really want to ruin that by coming in one day and saying, hey, so by the way, I'm the CEO. Still the same guy, but a different role. And so I kind of slow played it, tried to reduce the opportunity to create a real moment of power when I say moment of power, it's A Power of Moments is a book that I read a number of years ago. And it really was an impactful book that talked about how the situations that people aren't used to can really have a lasting effect and really move you in the right direction. So I really think that I should have used something like that, or thinking about my kids now, a rite of passage that really put everybody's mindset, including my own, in that right space of, okay, this is a different role. As much as we don't want it to be, I'm in a different place and the organization's in a different place.
I think for our listeners, it's important to recognize this is kind of a unique case study in the sense that there's a lot of people that are listening that are kind of saying, hey, at some point I want to be COO or I want to be CEO of a company. And what does that look like? And so I just make a couple points here. One is you don't generally get the chance to be the CEO unless something hasn't gone right. And so a big part of stepping up and being the leader, as John says, is just accepting where things are and not saying, well, if only. A lot of the CEOs that I've worked with that aren't able to make the transition and be successful CEOs spend a lot of their time blaming the previous administration and saying, well, I'm failing because of this and that. And look, when you become CEO, you kind of get to do that for a while, but at some point you own it. And the reality is you never would get to be CEO unless the person in front of you either left or that they made a few mistakes. I think it's really important to just have this for folks who are aspiring to be the leader, to be the CEO, COO, whatever the leader is for them that they're aspiring to be, is to recognize that probably the number one thing you can do is just accept responsibility and own it and let other people know that you own it and get rid of the excuses. And John was a great example of this. He had 5 previous CEOs he could have blamed for any number of things that were wrong. He had some tired investors. He had some employee relationships that had been broken because of things that other people had done. But he really took the attitude of like, hey, this is mine now. And I'm just grateful that it's mine. My advice is like, be grateful that it's your stewardship and recognize that it is your stewardship because of some of the failures that have happened.
That's an important perspective. Thank you for jumping in on that. And John, that was obviously a lot of pressure for you, even as grateful as you were for that position. What led you to accepting the position after all those previous CEOs?
That's a great question. And I have no idea, of course, because especially the stage that we're setting, I had an understanding that this was some sort of fire, whether it was a car fire I needed to rescue a child, or it was a fire that was ready to roast the best marshmallow in the world. It was definitely still a fire. And so I think maybe to Gavin's point, there is something about creating change, fixing things that I'm attracted to and was excited about in this opportunity. Within the first week or two, we had to recognize very quickly that we couldn't blame anything on the past. We couldn't go back and say, oh, well, this has caused this scenario today and we're all angry and we're going to be, frustrated and bitter about having to fix it now. I also want to pause just for a minute and recognize that I have never before in my life experienced the recognition or understanding of how somebody could have a nervous breakdown. And I want to be very open and honest with that in this, especially in this discussion. I persevered and used grit and used prayer and used all sorts of things to get through. But it was really the first time in my life where I really could truly feel, man, I see how somebody could go there. I see how somebody could fall into this cycle of anxiety, cycle of imposter syndrome, things like that actually can absolutely impact you in the CEO role or any high pressure role. And I experienced that more vividly and strongly than I ever had in the past. So it really required me to reframe that story and to say, I'm going to be grateful for the challenges that have been put ahead of us. I'm going to recognize that it's not perfect, but I also had to be extremely grateful for the incredible things that each one of those people that may have sinned in the past in our org also did to get us there. You can't get the good without the bad, and you can't get the bad without the good. So having that perspective and trying to use that in that process really helped me.
Gavin, you're nodding your head. I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Thanks, Kez. Yeah. So I would jump in there and say, one of the amazing things about startups is it's a crucible of psychology. If you have the right leader, and we certainly had that in John, the last thing you need to do is add pressure. You actually add support, you add advice, you add resources as opposed to piling on. And I'm always surprised when I work with other VCs or other angel investors who actually don't know how to do that, they add pressure. That doesn't help. It actually leads to worse outcomes anyway. So it's kind of an irrational thing I think people do to deal with their own fears. But I just think it's important to recognize the role of the folks who are supporting the people in the arena is like, there's enough pressure and temperature. We're there to support and try to get through it as opposed to throw tomatoes. And so anyway, I would make that observation because it's actually irrational behavior on the part of investors and VCs and angel investors.
Gavin, that's such a good point about it. It brings out who we truly are. It brings out the best and it also brings out the worst. But I love that you highlight that it's just this duality as so many things in life are. Segueing a little bit, John, Chargeback's growth really boomed since you became CEO. And in fact, it was acquired by SIFT, a digital fraud prevention company, in May of 2021. Can you tell us what that experience was like for you?
Living through it, it certainly didn't feel like a boom until looking back and being able to say, wow, okay, this is pretty special. But I would say it was an absolutely incredible experience from every angle. SIFT's an absolutely amazing company. One of the things that you think about both for investors, for yourself, for employees, for everything is where can we land this thing, recognizing that an exit is necessary. With SIFT, it was really nice. They've built a really incredible kind of suite of digital trust and safety solutions. And they're really trying to help everybody have higher levels of trust in the internet. And we recognized early on that our customers needed a combination of their solutions with our solutions. And so we partnered early with SIFT, and it looked like it was just going to be an incredible partnership that was really going to help us both along. And then we were very excited when it turned into, okay, this looks like this will be a match made in heaven and we will get to move forward. But I will say the thing that excited me that absolutely, was really at the top of my list when I was making that, should we do this, should we not do this list for myself, was the cultural fit with SIFT and Chargeback was absolutely incredible. I had many employees come up to me and say, I just couldn't have imagined a better organization for us to come be a part of. And I think they found the experience rewarding across the board. But recognizing that the employees have the right place to land and have had an incredible experience, I couldn't be happier about that.
And Gavin, what was it like for you as an investor to witness this transformation from the beginning to John taking over as CEO and then being acquired by SIFT?
Chargeback was an investment out of Fund 1. This is an $8 million fund that we raised back starting in 2008. We announced the sale. I sent out a social post that quoted Shakespeare saying, all's well that ends well. And I was the only one left that had been there from the beginning. It's literally just me. You definitely could argue, hey, why did we keep funding this thing and finding new investors and bringing in people? And there was a problem to be solved. And I was pretty dogmatic about it and continued to believe, maybe foolishly so, but it was nice to have this be a win for really everybody that was involved at that point. And yeah, a lot of lessons along the way for us and a lot of incredible effort by John and many other people to get it over the line. And so I was just happy to be cheering along the way. And this was a massive relief to kind of for this one to be safely housed within SIFT. And this will probably be the key company for the returns of Fund 1, which is kind of near and dear to my heart. So love that.
And Gavin, Fund 1 was basically your startup. Basically,
yeah.
That was your
Fund 1 is kind of is in some ways my personal chargeback.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess we've kept the same team, but Fund 1 is a little bit rockier than our other funds. Well, a lot, and a lot of things learned over the years with that.
Well, it'll be all's well that ends well with that too, I'm sure. So that'll be great. And then I want to know, Gavin, what strategies did you see John implement that really drove change? Like, let's get really tactical and specific here. What strategies did you see?
Yeah, I think John, what he really brought to Chargeback, I think, was a lot of deftness with people and engagement in mentoring and coordinating the efforts of the team in a way that Chargeback had not seen.
Yeah. Did you say deafness or deftness?
Yeah. Not deafness, but deftness. Okay. Yeah. So he had a lot of facility with people that was notable, getting product and engineering talking and sales. And so maybe I could just speak to a moment when I realized that we had made the right move in promoting John to CEO. It would probably be a board meeting that was maybe 2 or 3 board meetings in. And us going through the update on the business, update on the team, the go forward plans, and me saying, this feels like one of my other great companies and not like a chargeback board meeting. And it was John who was able to take those best practices that he had and what he learned and really transform a culture that was probably pretty consistently delivering an experience as a board member that was very different than other companies and leveled it up pretty quickly. And that was like the tangible evidence for me of like, oh, this board meeting, this is like a company with momentum and energy and foresight, and it's coming at us in a proactive way.
I have to, of course, admit in that process that the first 3 times that I swung and missed, Gavin was extremely supportive, as well as secondarily definitely provided coaching, as did the other board members on, let's look at changing this a little bit. And obviously some of the pieces were just reality of what we were actually living. And so it was a time in Chargeback's history where, we maybe didn't have a lot of things that would look really great on a board deck and would not put us in a scenario where you would want to compare us to other portcos. And, sometimes very much we were just sharing the reality, but because of Gavin's coaching and certainly the rest of the balance of the board's coaching as well, it jointly was able to get us to that point where we could be proud of it.
Yeah. Were there any pieces of advice specifically that you'd like to pass on to other entrepreneurs and how they handle their board meetings?
Maybe I'll skip ahead to something maybe I was thinking about earlier that I was going to share later, which was, this really important point where you decide who's going to be your cheerleaders. And you identify whether it's the board you've been given or the board you're going to create. And if you've been given a board, immediately own it and make sure that it's the board you wanted to create. And if not, make changes to fix that. And obviously some of those things are plausible and some of them are not, I recognize.
Yeah.
But having that balance of challengers and cheerleaders on your board is one of the most important things that you can possibly do. And I will say Gavin's number one character trait that really helped me to not give up in the process and not to say, hey, this was awesome. Thanks for this opportunity, but you all can have this thing back, really had a lot to do with his cheerleading. He came in and absolutely asked the tough questions, absolutely challenged the things that should have been improving and should have been doing better on. But he always found the time and the ability to say, I see the progress, I see effort, I see all of these things that I think Gavin referred to earlier, which blows his mind that you don't always get that. But, we were already on a pressure cooker, and to have Gavin be able to walk in and be like, look, guys, chill out. This is good. We're making progress. Let's go. Let's continue with this progress. Let's double down on it. Here are the things that I think are great. Let's focus more on those and less on the other pieces, was beyond invaluable in really building an environment that I felt like I could continue to lean into every day. And certainly every month, which turned into every 6 weeks, which turned into every quarter for board meetings. Luckily, the frequency reduced once we started having some results. But we spent a lot of time with Gavin the first little bit.
Yeah, John got off the emergency protocol. So that's always a good sign. If the frequency is dropping, you're getting a little more rope, which is awesome. It's very possible to build relationships with board members and investors when you're sharing bad news. That is very possible. And if done well, it will, if you do it well. The worst thing you can do is hide bad news. I think some entrepreneurs feel like they always have to give good news. And that was part of our history at Chargeback, which got us into problems. Once you're on the same side of the table, it's really important to just share the journey and get to know your people. And especially at the early stages, be really transparent. As you build a bigger and bigger company, you do need to manage your board. It starts to be just a little bit more of a performance, and the public company situation being the ultimate performance. Even at that point, you're sharing what's going on in a transparent way, but you're being very, very thoughtful and deliberate about it.
It's the worst possible and most difficult possible scenario for managing your bosses, because they're all your bosses. And you got to do an amazing job at finding that balance of telling them what you need from them as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I did that very well for a while.
John, now that we understand your story with Chargeback a little better, what advice would you give to our listeners when their companies are going through seemingly endless hard times?
I have to be very honest that I considered giving up a number of times. I don't think actually many would have blamed me. There would have been sadness. And I think Gavin especially would have been like, oh, darn it. We thought this was finally the
15th CEO.
Let's go. That was a realization that I came to later of like, oh, not everybody will hate me if I were to give up. But I'm beyond grateful, especially having completed the experience, that I didn't give up and to be able to experience and go through the final outcome. Some of the times when I was ready to quit, I really took myself through an extremely powerful, what I guess I'll call it a visualization exercise, where I visually talked through the conversation and vividly forced myself to go through the conversation, where I would let an employee know that I had to fire them because Chargeback was not going to be successful. And not that those scenarios aren't the best thing for the organizations sometimes, but in my scenario, I recognize that, especially in certain times, we were so lean, if we had to cut a few, we might just be out anyhow. And so allowing myself to go to that dark side and allow that to really drive me and to show up that day when I didn't feel like it, because you know what, Courtney or one of the other folks is dependent on us succeeding. She does not want to go find another job. She does not want to lose all the effort and goodwill she has put into the organization. And that, willingness to serve her or another employee got me through a ton of really difficult times. So I think if you can spend time in that process as well, and then of course use the chip on your shoulder here and there as well, then it's a great place to be.
That's a really interesting perspective. I like going to the end and playing things out. I think that's a really powerful exercise. I would like to end. You've already shared so many. I'd love to ask you the question we ask everyone on this show. And that is, what's an effective practice that you've implemented in your work or personal life that you think has had a great impact on your success?
I'm absolutely convinced that maintaining a positive attitude is a superpower. I think that people who can leverage that and maintain that is absolutely get you through scenarios where you wouldn't otherwise ever be able to make it through. If I think about it tactically, how do I maintain a positive attitude? I'm sure that some of it's in my nature. I'm sure some of it's in my belief system. But also tactically, I find that my morning routine makes an outsized impact on me being able to maintain my positive outlook. I happen to like to get up early. If I see the sunrise, there's something about that day that allows you to just have it be a more incredible experience than otherwise, right? I drink water first thing. I exercise first thing. And then I really focus on a journal that I kept, that I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for every day. I spend some time in scripture, and then I really define the one most important thing for me that I want to accomplish that day. So if nothing else happens, if nothing else works, I'm going to accomplish this one thing. And I don't always get it done, but most of the time I do. And, the whole process together takes me like 90 minutes of the morning, and, really sets the stage for allowing me to walk into the office and feel like I can maintain a growth mindset and I can feel like the leader that I want to be. And I think that's really set the stage for me.
Yeah. Now I'm reevaluating my morning routine and Gavin, I would love to know your insights on what John has said and how you've seen that play out in his role as CEO.
What's cool about the Chargeback experience is we can say, hey, this was really challenging and hard, and it was still a positive outcome for a lot of people, which is awesome. But I think it's also cool for people to say, hey, even when it's positive, it's super hard. And there's a lot of luck and there's a lot of things that have to go your way. That's just how the game works. And a lot of what makes it rich and a meaningful experience is those things you overcome in yourself and your team. And so I just want people to realize people are listening to this are probably in a tough journey right now, and just say, hey, that's actually the norm. And so when someone raises a big round or they sell a company or they get a big promotion, just recognize that it's probably a lot harder than it looks. Don't beat yourself up if it's hard right now.
I really appreciate this discussion. John and Gavin, thank you so much for being on the show today. I had so many takeaways, not the least of which is, John, I really think you are just a glutton for punishment, because coming in as CEO like that, thank you for being here. Thank you for the insights you've shared and the valuable takeaways that I know that our listeners are going to walk away with. So thank you.
And thank you enough. And I just wanted to finish with a shout out to the incredible team at Chargeback, all that came before, all that were there during my time, and all that will continue to make it in the solution successful at SIFT. Just indebted to you. Everybody in the organization and the investors across the board are indebted, and couldn't have done it with the kindest and most brilliant founders, employees, investors, customers, et cetera. Just been an incredible experience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kez. Thanks, John.
And of course, thank you for listening as we dive deep into what it takes to create the perfect pitch. If you want to learn more about our investor, Gavin Christensen from Kickstart, or our CEO, John Munro at Chargeback, we'll have a link to the company and a longer bio in our show notes at kickstartfund.com. You can listen to more episodes of Perfect Pitch wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you like what you're learning, leave us a review or rating. We'll be back next time with more insights from entrepreneurs and the investors who funded them. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing.